Okay, so this is a quick video tutorial on the Bridging DAWs project. Now, there's a lot of things that this project asks you to do that we've covered already in earlier projects, like setting up interfaces and making sure that all of those types of connections are already made. Creating the content itself is already covered in some earlier videos, so I'm not going to cover that here. What I want to show you are the things that are not part of the earlier projects and that actually create the bridges between the different software programs that we're going to use. So this very first one has us in GarageBand, and you've already got a project here, little details like the title of it up here, BDP, RM, because I'm the only person in my group with my first and last name are already present. And I've got my 4 tracks arranged as we've talked about to have them from top to bottom: drummer, drums track, and then there's a bass track, there's a piano loop that's doing some chords, and then finally there is a focus line, which in this case is a lead line that, for what it's worth, I will just mention to you that I did this using the just the musical typing keyboard in GarageBand, so that I was able to play along and just create the lead line. But this is what it sounds like. And it is what it is. It is nothing exceptionally exciting musically, but it does have all the parts that we need, and that's important for this project to work, that we've got all 4 of these parts and they are distinct and they all fill their roles. The other thing you'll notice up here is that I've engaged the cycle button up here near the transport, and this is this gold colored button here, and what that's doing is it's actually segmenting these first 8 measures. For what it's worth, this cycle range can actually be moved anywhere I want. I can also shorten it or lengthen it depending on what I need, but what I want to do right now is I would just want to make sure that my 8 measures that I'm using for this musical excerpt, as far as the original content from GarageBand, is clearly identified. Later on, you may find that you don't actually need to use this cycle element when you do this kind of thing later, but for now, just to make sure we're getting the right stems created, we want to make sure that we do engage that. So I'm going to go under the assumption that you've got your content created, and if you don't, like I said, you can consult some of the earlier projects and videos if you're not sure, or me obviously directly, if you're not sure how to do that or if you don't recall. But in any case, so the next thing we're going to do is we have to trick GarageBand into letting us send out the individual parts as stems. GarageBand is great for a lot of things, but as we've talked, there are some limitations and some things that you eventually have to work around. This is one of them. GarageBand wants to send everything out all mixed together, all as one stereo track, which normally would be fine, but in this case, we need the isolated parts to do the next step. So the way we're going to get around that is we are going to simply take each track and we're going to solo it. And in GarageBand, the way we do that, as you will recall, is we hit the solo button here. And you'll notice that in this case, my drummer track is now highlighted. The other ones have turned gray. And in fact, I can confirm that I'm only going to get the drummer track by playing it, and all we hear are the drums. So what I'm going to now do is I'm going to take this one drum track and I'm going to go up to Share, and I'm going to go down to Export Song to Disk. And then from there, what I'm going to do is I'm going to navigate to my CMAS data drive, and I've got my original main folder here, Bridging DAWs RM, because that's me again. And inside there, I'm going to create a new folder. And in this new folder, I am going to call it GB, which is GarageBand. And since we're making stems, we're going to call them stems. That's going to create a new folder. Below here, I've got some options with regard to file format and things of that nature. I'm going to leave these as is. AIFF is fine. Uncompressed audio is fine. And I'm going to click here, Export Cycle Area, just to be sure that I'm getting the correct 8 measures, and I don't worry that something weird with where I place the cursor or the playhead or anything of that nature might have messed something up. It just makes life easier. Now, before I hit export, the other thing I want to do is I want to title this stem that I'm going to be getting out. So in this case, it's my drums. So I'm going to call it drums, and I'm going to hit export now. And you can see we've now exported the drums. I'm now going to move to the next one. I'm going to take the drums off of solo. I'm going to now, and everything is lit back up, so I've got everything. Now I'm going to solo my bass line. Again, I can isolate that just to confirm it, and you can hear just the bass. So now I'm going to go up again to share. I'm going to go export song to disk. It should put me back in my GB stems folder, but if for some reason it doesn't, you can get there. And you'll notice here it's kind of grayed out because I can't access it from this particular function, but I've got my drums stem there. Again, I'm going to leave everything as is in this settings options spot here, but what I am going to do is change the name of what I'm saving. I'm going to call it bass, and I'm going to hit export. And now I have my bass line. I'm going to go again, take that off solo. Here I have my piano. And you can call these stems whatever you want, but as long as they are distinct and you can tell what they are without having to guess later, that's really all that matters. So again, leaving everything the same, I'm in my GarageBand stems folder. I'm going to call this one piano just because, correctly spelled. I'm going to call it piano just because it makes more sense to me to call it that since it is a piano part. I'm going to hit export. And I've got my piano part now. And now I'm going to do my last one, and I could call it Funk Splash Lead if I want, because that's the name of the instrument that I used. I could call it Focus Line, I could call it Lead Line, I could call it Melody, whatever I feel is accurate. But in any case, I'm going to go back up to share, export song to disk, and I'm going to be in this folder, my fourth and final stem that I need, and I am going to call this Focus because it is the focus line of everything that we're doing in this piece. It's the main melody, as it were. And here again, leaving all the other settings the same, hit export. And now I've got all of my stems done. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to create an Ableton set, as the instructions say. So I'm going to have you go do that, and we're going to start it right up from there. We're going to pick it up from there in just a moment with the next step. Okay, so here we are in Ableton Live. We've got an empty set up here right now. I'm going to assume, like before, that things like adjusting audio interfaces and those types of connections you've already taken care of. If not, feel free to see me individually, or again, you can consult earlier projects and instructions and videos and whatnot. But in any case, we're going to assume that that's okay. The thing I do want to double check on, though, is that I've titled my set correctly, because right now it just says untitled, and I want to fix that. So I'm going to go up to File. I'm going to go to Save Live Set As. And I am going to navigate to my CMAS data drive so that I can find my Bridging DAWs project. And when I click on there, and in fact, when I look inside that folder, I now see that I have two items. I now have my original GarageBand set, and I have my GarageBand stems, which inside here I can see all four of them. So I want to save inside the Bridging DAWs project folder, my main folder, I want to save this new Ableton set. And what I want to do is call it the same exact thing. One of the nice things about this is that because it's a different file type, I can give it the same name and we're all good. But most importantly, everything's inside this folder. It's really important that you stay organized. Every time you add an item, you don't want to be searching later for it or run the risk of having something happen to it that you don't have control over. So in any case, I'm now saving this live set, and that should be good to go. And you can see up here the name has changed for me. So now I need to get my stems into Ableton. This is going to be very similar to what you did way back in the beginning of the year with the Mixing 101 in Pro Tools project. We also did Mixing 101 in GarageBand. The concept is the same. We've got to import these stems. Now the only thing about it is we want to make sure that we are doing this in such a way that we get individual tracks. Let me show you what I mean by this. So if I go back to my Finder, and let me find my my folder here. So in my data drive, Bridging DAWs, and I'm going to pull up my stems. Now right now I've got these four folders. Now if I take them, or files, excuse me, these four stems, bass, drums, focus, piano, they're just in alphabetical order. If I take them all at once, you can see that it wants to place them one on top of each other. And in Ableton, that's not going to work for me because it means that I could only play one stem at a time. I want to be able to play these all at the same time in whatever order I want. So that's not going to work for me. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to release these. I'm going to actually undo that so it's like it never happened. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do these one at a time. Now, right now, in my stems folder, you'll notice it actually added 4 additional files, and these are utility files that Ableton adds. Don't worry about them. The ones I want are the .aif files. I do not want the .asd files. They are not the actual stems. So I'm going to do these one at a time, though. I'm going to take my bass, and I'm going to put it up here. And you'll see how I'm putting it up at the top. I've got a track there. Next, I'm going to put my drums right there. The colors may not be the same in your particular set. It just kind of depends on what Ableton decides to default to. But nonetheless, I've got my 4 tracks here. Now, these other 4 tracks I don't need. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the first one. It turns that light blue color. Then I'm going to shift click over to this last one that says 4 audio. And then I'm going to right click and I'm going to do delete. So now I just have my 4 files that I need. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change the names of the tracks to match the names of the stems. And the way I do that, I'm going to start with the first one here. I'm going to right click. I'm going to go to rename. And I'm going to change that one to bass. And then I'm just going to tab over. My second one I'm going to call drums. Tab over again. This one is focus. Tab over again. And I have piano. So I do want to do a couple other things to just organize things before I get started creating my new arrangement of this piece. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to rearrange the order of the tracks so it's more consistent with what we tend to do live and what we do in more elaborate studio sessions. I'm going to do this by simply grabbing the drums and the title of the track and just dragging it to the left. So now it goes drums, then bass. And then I'm going to switch the focus line to the outside here. So my order is now more consistent with what I had in GarageBand and again with what we would do in a live scenario with a mixer or again with more complex studio sessions. Drums, then bass, then in this case piano, but all the other instruments, and then my lead line so that there's some consistency there. The next thing is I can do all of this arranging with the mouse like I've done in the past, and I can click on the mouse and start my drums, and then I can bring my bass in when I want, and I can bring in the keyboard and the focus line and everything else whenever I want to do it. And I can do all that with the mouse, and it works, but it's a little bit clunky and it's not as organic as I would like it to be. It doesn't have as musically intuitive of a result necessarily. I suppose it could, but it's a little bit cumbersome. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to use something we've talked about before. We're going to use key mapping. And what we're going to do is we're going to assign specific keys on the computer's keyboard to trigger the clips and to stop the clips when I want to. So how we're going to do that is actually pretty simple. We're going to go up here to the right, and there's this little yellowish orange piano keyboard key right there. We're going to click on that to turn it off. This is the computer MIDI keyboard. We're going to disengage that. So now my computer keyboard no longer works as a MIDI controller. It's going to be working to trigger things. And then I'm going to press the button right next to that that's marked key. And when I do that, you'll see that everything that's available to me to key map is marked orange now. And there's a whole lot of options. I'm just going to do a few of them. You can do them this way if you want. There's a lot of variations here. Basically, the idea with key mapping is just like MIDI mapping. You're essentially creating your own controller. So do what works for you is my point. But here's one suggestion. I'm going to use the numeric keys 1 through 4 as my triggers for these clips here. So drums is going to be 1, and I simply select the drum clip there at the top and press the number 1 key on my keyboard, and you can see it marks it with a 1. And then also over here, I'm starting to generate a list of what keys I have mapped to what elements. So then next to that, I've got a bass, we'll make that 2. Next to that, I've got piano, we'll make that 3. Focus is going to be 4. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to engage these stop buttons on each track here. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to click on this one here, and I'm going to use Q because it's right below the 1. And I'm going to use W for this one because it's right below 2. E similarly for 3. And the R for 4. There's one more button that I want to get, and certainly you can experiment with all of these other available elements if you want. But the one other one that I want to make sure I engage is over here. This is the master stop button. I'm going to make that T, so they're all right in a row. Keep in mind, by the way, that capital versus lowercase does make a difference. So you want to make sure you know which one you need for which function. And that's, again, the other nice thing about the list that has been populated here. It tells me exactly what I assigned to which elements. So I've got all my key maps, though, now that I need. I'm going to turn off my key mapping switch here so that I can now play this. And what's nice about this, I'm going to hit my master stop button, so everything's now back to this gray play buttons, which means nothing's playing yet. If they're green, remember they'll automatically engage. But now I can start an arrangement on my own. So for example, maybe I don't want everything playing all at the same time. Maybe I want to start with my bass. So I'm going to start with key number 2. And then I want to bring my drums in. Here come my drums. And then I want to do my piano. Right? And now I'm going to bring in my lead line. And after this cycle, here we go. There's my focus, my lead line. And then it's playing. And then I want to take my lead line out after one pass, and now it's going to be gone, right? And there goes my piano. I took that away, take the bass away. I'm left with just drums, and now I'm going to bring everything back. And so on. And I can keep doing this as I see fit. So what I want you to do next is you're going to make an arrangement that you like. You're going to want to practice this, and then you're going to want to record it. How do you record it? Well, once you know you've got an arrangement that works for you, you're going to perform it essentially in Ableton Live by simply pressing this black circular record button that's in the transport here. It's the arrangement record button. And when you press that, anything else you do is going to get recorded over in the arrangement view. So give that a shot, and I'll show you what that looks like completed in just a second. So here we are back again in Ableton, and I'm still looking at a session view of my clips, but I've recorded using this button up here, the circle button, in my arrangement view the following. So the way I get to the arrangement is this. Over here on the right, I'm looking for these three little horizontal lines. I'm going to click on that, and now I'm in arrangement view. And you can see over here, I've got an arrangement of everything that I actually performed. So how do I get to hear that? Well, it's grayed out right now. Over here, there's this little orange button that says back to arrangement. So I want to hear this. So I'm going to click on that, and now I can play everything. And in fact, if I just hit the play button, you'll hear the arrangement itself. And here it comes. It starts actually in measure 3. There it goes. So it starts with drums. Then a few measures later, you'll hear the piano come in. And you can see I've got kind of chunks and blocks and things all organized. Here comes the bass and the focus at the same time, and so on. Let me stop this for a second. And you can see visually where things come in, where they come out, what they all are. Everything's organized. You can see my track names are still consistent. Everything makes sense. One of the nice things also in this arrangement view is I can, for example, I can stretch segments if I want. I can shorten them. I can move them around. So I can record the arrangement, then when I'm doing the playback, I can also go in and I can make some additional edits if I want, depending on whatever the effect might be that I'm hoping to get. So I've got some control here, and I've got a lot of options as far as making an arrangement of my 4 original parts any way I want. So I've got an arrangement that works. Now what I need to do next is I have to get this out of Ableton and put it into Pro Tools for final mixing. So the way I'm going to do that is actually a lot easier than it was with GarageBand. Ableton does this all for me rather nicely automated. It's not very complicated. It makes life a lot simpler. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by selecting the entire area that is my whole arrangement. Okay, all of this area that's now in blue. And I even, just to make it easier on myself, and we talked about markers in an earlier project, you can look this up in another video if you want, or you can also consult with me directly. I made some markers, so I have a start and an end marker in my arrangement here, just to make sure that I know where everything's happening. It's optional, but it's always nice to have those little things. So I've got it selected, it's turned blue, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on my drums track, and then I'm going to shift click on the bottom track here, focus. And you notice everything is that light blue color. I've got my arrangement light blue, I've got my tracks light blue, because there's 3 other tracks here at the bottom, and I can pull those out as additional stems if I want, but I don't need them in Pro Tools. What I need are these 4 performances, if you will, of the individual parts. They are going to come out as stereo tracks, which is fine. That may create some sonic anomalies that you want to address in the bass line particularly, and also in the focus line, and we've talked about that a little bit already, and we can cover that in some more detail later on, but the 4 stereo tracks are going to work just fine for what we need. I've got everything already set up here now to export my audio tracks, is what it's called in Ableton. How I do that is I go up here to File, and I go to Export Audio. Now, when this next little menu here comes up, I just want to be very careful to check a couple of things. The first thing is rendered track. Right now it says master, and if I leave it as master, what it's going to do is it's going to dump out the entire performance, my entire arrangement, but all as one stereo track without separating the individual stems. And what I want are those individual stems so I have the individual parts to mix. So in any case, the way I do that is I go over here to this drop-down menu, and instead of all individual tracks or master, I'm going to do selected tracks only because I selected the 4 that I want. Now conceptually, I suppose I could do each stem. You can see them all listed here one at a time, but that would take more time. Selected tracks only. I want to make sure that my start point matches my start number, which it does, and it goes all the way through. It says duration. Well, I've highlighted to the end, and that makes it a total of 44 measures, so I'm all good. I'm going to leave all the rest of these settings just as they are. Don't worry about them. AIF is just fine. Sample rate is just fine. Everything is good as is. I'm now going to hit export. And then I'm going to navigate to my data drive. I'm going to find my Bridging DAWs main folder, right? I've got my GarageBand stems. I've got my Ableton project that I'm in right now. I've got my original GarageBand project as well. I'm going to do a new folder just like before. And I'm going to call this one AL Stems, Ableton Live Stems. And now I'm inside that folder. I'm going to hit Save. And you'll see it's going through, it's rendering everything, it's converting my drums. And it's going to go through and run all this. Now there's my bass. Now is my piano part. And finally my focus line. And I've got everything bounced out as stems from Ableton. If you want to check that, you can go back to your Finder, and you can now navigate again to that folder. Inside it, I've got my Ableton Live stems, and inside that, I've got all of my files that I need. Now remember, it's added the .asd files. We will not need those. What we're going to want is these AIF files. From here, you can quit Ableton Live, and we're going to now create a new Pro Tools session, also called BDP, the first and last initials of everybody in your group, and we are going to set up a Pro Tools session where we can do final mixing of our content that we created in GarageBand that we arranged in Ableton, and I will show you how to do that in just a moment. So here we are now in Pro Tools, and what we're going to do is exactly what we did in the very first project that we did in the entire year with Mixing 101 in Pro Tools. The only difference is we're going to use stems that you've created and not stems that were recorded by somebody else in another studio. So if you don't remember, I'll show you again really quick how to put these into GarageBand, or excuse me, how to put these into Pro Tools. But again, you can go back and check out the Mixing 101 video that goes into quite some detail in how all the rest of this works. But in any case, in the Finder, I'm going to navigate to my CMAS data drive. I am now looking for my Bridging DAWs main folder and my AL stems. You'll notice, by the way, that I've got a whole bunch of items here, keeping myself very organized. I've got my GarageBand project. I've got my Ableton Live project. I've got my GarageBand stems folder that we used already, and I've got my Ableton Live stems folder that we're about to use. And right below that, I have my Pro Tools session folder. So everything is organized. I can find everything without any problem. This is really critical. Organization matters. Anyway, inside my AL stems folder, I need the 4 .aif files, not the .asd. So I'm going to pull these over, and I'm going to click on the first one. Don't double click, just single click. Then if you hold down Command, you can click on the others. You can also do these one at a time if you want, but it is kind of nice to do it all at once. It's just faster. I'm going to take these and drag them from the from the folder in the Finder straight into my Pro Tools session. I'm just going to drop them here. And you can see right there, I've got my 4 stems. Now again, these are stereo tracks, and there are some things we can talk about later to changing the impact of the bass line in particular into more of a mono, which would be a more standard bass line effect. But for now, this is going to work. Don't worry about that so much. We want to just keep everything kind of as is. Now, if I want, I can leave them right here starting at approximately measure 9, or I can move the whole thing over to the beginning, or I can put it wherever I want. I'm going to suggest, just for the sake of keeping this easy on yourself, slide everything over to the beginning. And again, if you're not sure about things like the Smart tool up at the top and all these other functions in Pro Tools, we've covered all of this already multiple times in other projects, but you can certainly feel free to talk to me directly or these earlier projects, videos that we've talked about. Now, having said that, I want you to take a look again at our order here. Because it was in alphabetical order, we are again out of order. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the drums and put those on top. We're going to take the bass, now it's second, the focus line is going to be on the bottom so that we've got some consistency. So the next thing you are going to do is you are going to go in and you are going to do all of the Mixing 101 elements. So you're going to do panning, and you're going to do levels, and you're going to do EQ, and you're going to do compression for every single track. If you want, again, to use the mix window, go up to window here, select mix. Here's my mixer. I can control my panning. I can control my faders. I can insert my effects over here. And again, the Mixing 101 Pro Tools video goes into all that detail. I'm going to make the assumption that you are familiar with that still, and if not, certainly let me know and I will help you. But as soon as you have this all mixed, you can then finally do the very last step, which is what I'm going to show you right now. So let's assume that I've mixed everything. I have my entire session mixed exactly the way I want it, accounting for spatial placement with panning, accounting for levels with faders, accounting for timbre shaping with EQ, and accounting for acoustic energy with compression. I like how everything sounds. I've got everything exactly the way I want it. So what I need to do is I need to create a what's called in and out point to do this last bounce. So I need to get this out of Pro Tools into a file that I can listen to it on my phone, for example, or play it in a car or send to a friend or whatnot without them having to have Pro Tools in order to listen to it. I just want a stereo MP3. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make sure that I have the grabber tool selected. I'm just going to select one of my stems here. And since they're all the same length, I only need to select one of them. And you'll notice that I've now got this highlighted area here. And this shows me exactly where it's going in, which is the very beginning, and where it's coming out, which is right around measure 43 or so. I'll show you that again. Here is nothing selected, right? And it's just totally the same across the board. Here is selecting one of these stems. Now, keep in mind that if I went in and did some additional arranging, let's say that I had taken my piano part, for example, and I added some bits to it and it wound up being this length. Well, now I'm not aligned to the whole thing. I'll have to move my in and out points to make sure that they account for the entire session. So just make sure that you're accounting for everything. And the way to do that is once you select this area, if you hit play, it'll start wherever the beginning is, and it'll go all the way through until the end. So if something, for example, is wrong, and let's say you had just that area was all you had selected, when you hit play, it's going to start at that wrong spot, and it's going to then finish at the wrong spot. So then you can know to adjust it. But I'm going to realign all of these. So now everything's back at the beginning, and I've got my opening spot and my closing spot, my in and out punch points, they're called punch in and out points, are now selected. So that's all good to go. Now I'm going to go up to File, and I am going to go to Bounce to Disk. This is going to call up this menu. File type, I want an MP3, right? And actually, let's look right above that, bounce source. In this case, I'm just coming out of 1 and 2. I can see this in my outputs here. So make sure that this is saying the same thing. Lots of output possibilities depending on how you have yourself set up and what interface you're using. Again, we talk about this in some other videos and some other projects, but if you can't remember, certainly see me. File type, I want an MP3. I could do, for example, an AIF and add an MP3 if I wanted both, or a WAV, or whatever it is I want. But in any case, I'm going to do just an MP3. Format, it's got to be interleaved. That means that it's a single file that has a left side and a right side. If you do the others, mono means it's a single mono file. There's no left-right separation. Multiple mono means you'll get left and right, but they're going to come out as one left file, one right file, and you're not going to be able to play them together. So we don't want that either. The one you want is interleaved. And then leave the rest of it basically the same. File name, what do you want to call this thing? I'm just calling it what it is, BDP, RM. If you want to leave the one in, you can, but you don't have to. If I want to change where it's being saved, and you can see here we've talked about how files are organized. This is saving it within my CMAS data drive, within my Bridging DAWs folder, within my Pro Tools session folder under a folder called Bounced Files. The other thing that I'm doing here, and I can change that, by the way, if I want to change the location simply by hitting directory, but I'm going to leave it as is, and I suggest you do the same. But certainly it's up to you, just so you can find things easier later on. Make sure offline is selected. For such a short piece like this, it isn't the end of the world, but offline allows it to take care of bouncing things out at a much faster rate. It does not in any way impede quality or lose fidelity in any way that you would notice, but it does allow you to be a little more efficient with your time. Okay, and now I'm going to hit bounce. And I get this MP3 encoder window. I would just leave everything as is. If you want to add in any of these indicators here for title, artist, album, content, you certainly can, but you don't have to. We just want to get the file out for now. Later on, when we get into a little more detail about publishing to the web and whatnot, we may go into some more details with that. But for now, we'll just leave it as is. I'm going to hit OK, and I get a progress bar, and it is just bouncing that thing right out. Instead of 1 minute and 28 seconds, it took, a few seconds, which is nice. Now, when I go to my Finder, and I look inside Bounced Files, let me back you out 1 or 2 levels here. So here's my CMAS data drive. So inside my CMAS data drive, I have my main folder for this project. I've got all of my other subfolders here. Here's my Pro Tools session folder. Inside that, I've got everything, including something called Bounced Files. Look in there. There's my MP3. I can play it real quick. And there we go. I have my final MP3 of material that I created originally in GarageBand, I arranged in Ableton Live, and I mixed in Pro Tools. And the idea here is that now I can take this process and I can apply this in any way I want into bigger, larger scale projects that can cover any number of other options. Whatever you can think of, you've now got a little bit more control. So I'm excited to hear what you come up with. Let me know what else I can do. Like I said, consult those other videos if you need them, but hopefully all of this is familiar. We're just putting it together in a slightly different way than we have before, in a way that gives you more creative control and more creative options.